How does Starfield compare to all the other Bethesda games? It feels like the right time to determine that. Starfield's been out for a while, and I want to judge it fairly. I want to compare it now that it's 3 months later, and really ask that question, is Starfield as bad as some people have said, or is it actually really good? Is it a hidden gem? People are being too harsh on it. We're going to find that out today. I've called it the Bethesda tier list, but it's really the Todd Howard tier list. It's all the Bethesda games where he was at the helm, and we're going to start off with Fallout 3. This is an interesting one because I don't think time has been especially good to Fallout 3. It hasn't aged particularly well. When it released, it was critically acclaimed, fans seemed to love it, but it was mainly fans of previous Bethesda games, fans of Oblivion, for instance, who just wanted the same sort of game but with guns in that post-apocalyptic setting. Fans of original Fallout 1 and 2, they weren't so keen. They saw Fallout 3 as a bit of an abomination to some degree. Firstly, the main story. Essentially, if you really just drill down to it objectively, in Fallout 3, your character, your supposed wasteland wanderer, is essentially second fiddle to your cool dad Liam Neeson, who goes off and does all the things, and you essentially just follow him around. The main story is engaging, but you don't really do a whole lot yourself. I mean, I haven't played it extensively since around 2012, 2013, when I first played it. I didn't actually play it on release, so I don't have nostalgia goggles on. I gave it a fair shake a while ago. I've revisited it a couple of times. I think I can judge it fairly, and what I'll say is the main story's not great. There's some fun enough side quests, but a lot of them feel a little bit too jokey. It all feels like a bit of an amusement park where you go to different settlements and towns. There's always some sort of gimmick, like Megaton, there's the bomb in the middle of the town. It doesn't really make sense. Why would you build a town there? Why wouldn't you just build it somewhere else? Maybe there was some hidden lore I wasn't aware of, but there's just examples like that all the time where it feels super gamey. It doesn't feel like a realized world like a New Vegas where things make sense. The motivations of the different factions do have a logical reason for thinking the way that they do. I will say this though, I'm not as harsh on Fallout 3 as I was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I went through the phase many went through, where they played Fallout 3, they went to New Vegas, loved New Vegas much more, and never wanted to play Fallout 3 again. I did feel like that for a while, but there are things in Fallout 3 that aren't as good in New Vegas. For instance, the exploration, the storytelling within the world when you discover a new location. There's a lot of really cool ones in Fallout 3, and I think they get the gameplay loop of just wandering out in the world, going to random dungeons, caves, settlements. That feels pretty good. It feels really nice in the third game, and I actually like the atmosphere. I think it actually nailed the idea that you are wandering around a wasteland. It doesn't really get the towns and the characters right, but just the feeling of wandering all alone, isolated. It feels nice in Fallout 3. So I'm actually going to be generous here. I'm going to give it an A. That might seem a little startling, especially given the criticism I gave it. But keep in mind, I'm ranking these games based on how they compare to other Bethesda titles. If I did an every RPG tier list, I might put Fallout 3 a bit lower, a B or a C. But in the context of Bethesda games, I think an A is fair. We've then got Fallout 76. I'm going to judge it on when I played it, which is when it came out. I know it's gone through some improvements and so on, but there are a number of reasons I'm going to give it a D, the lowest possible category. And that is partly because of news I found out over the last few years. I used to give Fallout 76 a little bit of a pass because I thought it was a spin-off developed by, say, a B or a C team at Bethesda who just wanted to get this out while the rest of the team were hard at work on Starfield. And I thought, yeah, it's not for me. I don't really like what they did at that E3 years ago, where they hyped up Fallout 76 in the background. They did this subtle live stream, which I think they actually did for Fallout 4 as well. They basically teased a Fallout image. Todd would occasionally sneak over to the camera, show his face, get everyone excited, get people talking. And then they hit us with the bad news. This is an online-only Fallout. They told us we can play it single player, but they were really having a laugh with us. The single player element was hopeless. There weren't even NPCs in the game when it released. They had to add them later. It was a big brag for them that they were adding NPCs into the game. All a little bit sad, given that Bethesda used to be known for their worlds full of characters, full of quests, full of people you could speak to, and they might have said that having real players as the characters was the new way, but I think there's a big difference between Big Dick Johnny 69 trying to kill you and steal your loot versus an actual developed character who has a quest that actually has choice and consequence behind it. You've got to think, you've got to make a decision. Not really there for Fallout 76. Now again, I used to be less harsh on it because I thought it was a spin-off by a smaller team, while Toddy and the boys were hard at work on the full game. Turned out to not be the case. It seems like it was all hands on deck for Fallout 76, and we really should have known then that it was the beginning of the end. If they spent all their resources and time on this turd, it just doesn't make sense. I can't understand how they went from Skyrim, one of the biggest games of all time. Sure, Fallout 4 wasn't quite as big, but it was still a juggernaut, and then they just went off the rails. They then seemed to have to rush Starfield to get another single player out in a timely manner. It had been 8 years since Fallout 4, and now we are where we are. Not really looking good. So Fallout 76, I give it a D. It's where things went pear-shaped for the company completely. Some people might argue it was earlier, but there's no question that things were bad when Fallout 76 was doing the rounds. Some better news now, some more positive talk. Morrowind. This is getting an S. It's one of the best RPGs of all time. If I was doing just an every RPG tier list, it would still be in that S category. It's fantastic, it's innovative. At the time, 2003, there weren't many huge single-player RPGs where you could just go absolutely anywhere in the world, and it felt immersive because it was first-person, it was in 3D, there wasn't a lot like that at the time. There were some European games like Gothic, which had some similarities, but Bethesda was certainly doing their own thing with Morrowind. The quests themselves, there's a lot of really interesting ones I think back on and just moments in the world, like when you are wandering down a path and a random wizard, he falls out of the sky and you think, what has gone on here? I've got to loot him, I want to see what's going on, and the environment tells you a bit of a story. You've got to read notes, you've got to really analyze your surroundings. There was another really cool quest I remember, just a little one. It didn't have sort of heaps and heaps of engineering put into it. It was just a simple quest, but it stuck with me. And maybe this is a spoiler. If you haven't played it, I really highly encourage you to play it for the first time. But if you have played, you might remember this, where there's a guy who, I think his wife's wedding ring has been lost, and he tells you to go into the lake and find it. And you think, all right, I'll go in there, simple fetch quest. And then as you're looking for the ring, a bunch of bandits attack you, I believe, and try and kill you. And it's just a really awesome moment that's not gamey. This feels like something that could have happened in real life. I was tricked. I'm not seen as this genius character who everyone wants to suck up to. People are trying to rob me. They're trying to get the upper hand on me. And when that happened, I did stop and think about it. There were other quests like that in there, but I'd love to see more because a lot of quests in games right now, they always feel gamey, especially when, in role-playing games especially, you do a quest where you accept it, you follow the content, which might be to clear out a dungeon or go and find an item somewhere, and then at the last second, you're asked to make a decision, and it's usually, do you want this person to die or not to die? It's always linear like that in some games, where you just make a choice at the end. It doesn't feel like you've really got to think about what's going on, and the unexpected could happen. It's another reason I really like Baldur's Gate 3 and similar games like that. They don't feel as predictable, but Morrowind is an S. I could make a whole video talking about how good it is. It's not just the quests, the music, the exploration itself is fantastic. You can argue that there are some things wrong with it. For instance, the NPCs, they often feel like Wikipedia articles where you're just clicking through the same information. But back in 2003, it did so many new things that I don't think that matters so much. The last thing I'll mention is the setting. It's very unique for fantasy, much more unique than the later Elder Scrolls games, which kind of went back to generic fantasy, more like sort of Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, which is fine. However, when you've got something so unique, it is a shame that they didn't keep going with that. I think they were just trying to appeal to that wider audience, and maybe they thought they would relate more to dragons, to sword and sorcery, generic fantasy more than what was going in with Morrowind. Still a shame though. I thought they started something special and they kind of regressed after that. I'm going to do something unexpected. You think that I'm going to pick Starfield last, but I'm actually going to pick it right now because I think it'll be interesting to compare games sort of before that, like Fallout 4, after we have ranked this. So Starfield, where is it going to sit? Drum roll. Is it an S? Is it a little bit lower than that? Is it a B? It's going in the D. It can only go in the D. And I'm not sure if I'd rank it below Fallout 76 or not. If it's being looked at objectively as a game, sure, it's better than Fallout 76. But in terms of just disappointment, this was meant to be the brand new Bethesda IP, the brand new single-player game. There's only been one other game since Skyrim that they have released in that time, being Fallout 4. So you go from Skyrim, beloved by lots and lots of fans. Every year there's a new release. People are buying it. They get nostalgic about it. They're introducing it to their little brother, their sister, their kids. And then they follow this all up with Starfield. And I mentioned at the start of the video that I didn't want to do something like this the second it came out, because a lot of people, I do this as well, something releases and you either get overexcited or you maybe hate it too much because you get caught up in everything that's going on. But I honestly think that with Starfield, it's actually worse. I think as time's gone on, people actually dislike it more than those weeks where it came out. I know sometimes it's fun to be negative on the internet about certain games, and there's been so many horror stories on the internet when I think of, say, Anthem, Cyberpunk when it released, for instance. But Starfield for me was actually different. I do reckon a lot of people wanted to enjoy this game, me included. I played it, I fired this up, and I thought, I reckon this is going to take me back to the times of a Fallout 3 and a Skyrim. Not necessarily my favourite games of all time, but something I could get lost into, I could have fun exploring a world, finding interesting things, stories in the world, dead characters with notes on them, something painted on the wall that paints a little picture, paints a little story of what happened in the past. I could go to interesting dungeons. I could do some fun enough quests. I could discover them as I'm exploring. It didn't turn out to be that at all. It was all about the procedural generation. You could go to 100 different planets. It had to be the hard sell from Todd. You can go absolutely anywhere you want. You've got this freedom. It used to be you can climb that mountain. Now it is you can explore the entire universe. And it seemed like that dream was all they cared about, was being able to say that you can technically go anywhere. And the actual game, being able to enjoy an experience, that was just lost. All decisions apparently go through Todd, or they did at least when it came to Starfield. And whatever he did, he failed. The game just isn't fun, and they admitted that to a degree. They said at some point, oh, Starfield actually only became fun maybe 12 months ago. They said that around the time it came out. They deluded themselves. At some point in development, there were sensible people who said this game isn't fun. Maybe they drank the Kool-Aid, or those people left, and now it was just yes men to Todd. The game never ended up being fun. I'm a little more annoyed with it than something like Fallout 76, because there was the opportunity there for a good game. This isn't something that's been ruined because of corporate meddling, where there's microtransactions, there's a battle pass. They tried to force in online elements. It was simply sheer incompetence. There was no agenda here. It was just a bad game. I did say no agenda. There was some stuff going on in the towns. There's like one race of people in all of the towns. It gets a bit weird, you know what I'm talking about. But aside from that, in terms of the game design, no agenda there. They were just trying to make something that would appeal to RPG gamers. They had a big ego. They still thought they could ride off the coattails of Fallout, of the Elder Scrolls. Whatever they did, it sucked. Over time, it's getting worse and worse. When it released, everyone was giving it positive reviews. It had 85+%, probably similar on Xbox. People wanted to love it there because the game was taken away from Sony fans, and they would have said, we want this to be the big game to show that Xbox has got it. Absolutely not. Sure, it might be slightly better than Redfall, but it's another stinker. I hate this game because there was just that chance for something cool. If they had have just reined it in. If it had have just been 2 or 3 planets that you could genuinely explore, we could have had another nice Bethesda title to sink our teeth into, but we can't really do it. The faction quests are fun, they're decent enough going through the story, it's okay, but it's worse than pretty much any other major RPG this year. I'd rather play something like Hogwarts Legacy, which is a good game. I don't think it's the best game ever, but it's a solid enough game. I'd rather play that than the latest Bethesda single-player title, and I can't believe I have to say that. It's unimaginable it would have been earlier in the year. I think there was some copium, again, about Fallout 76, where myself, I'm partly guilty of this, thinking that, oh, we can't really blame Bethesda for all of that, the main A team, the Todd Howard team, because it was just other people developing it. Clearly not the case. The whole org is incompetent, and it's another case of Microsoft picking up a developer who have completely lost it, they're past their prime. So I give Starfield a D because of the disappointment, which is, for me, immeasurable. Not the worst game ever in the world, that might be hyperbolic, but compared to the standards Bethesda set previously, it is garbage. I move on now to Oblivion. Something a little bit different. How I see Oblivion is it's a little bit like Resident Evil 4. What I mean by that is when Resident Evil 4 came out, it was a very good action horror title, but it did a lot of damage to the horror genre. We didn't get survival horror titles for a long time, and other series around it like Silent Hill, new IPs around horror, they all tried to be like Resident Evil 4 to some degree because it sold so well. Now, it's a good game. It's a very solid game. The remake as well is fantastic, but I was always a little peeved that it did so much damage to the overall horror genre on its own, and I feel the same about Oblivion. I think Oblivion is fun enough. If you go through all the quest lines, the Dark Brotherhood quest line, for instance, is really, really fun. There's some interesting quests there, like the murder mystery one. You probably know what I'm talking about. If you've played it, it's pretty cool. There's some other nice quest lines. The DLC, the Shivering Isles, I believe it is, fairly high quality, it's fun, but it introduced a lot of pet peeves of mine. For instance, level scaling, which basically made sure that you could never get too strong or never too weak. And it just killed the exploration compared to something like Morrowind, where if you found an awesome item in Morrowind, it's hand-placed there. You've had to likely clear some tough content or really get exploring around the map to find something interesting. And when you get that cool sword or that awesome piece of armor, you know that you've earned it, and you know that the enemies that you fight, you're guaranteed to be stronger and it's going to be an easier time for you. But with Oblivion, the reason I hate the level scaling is, let's say I start up my character at level 1, I'm a weakling. I jump into the world, and there's a cave to my left. It should just be weaklings in there, goblins, level 1 or 2, because it's a brand new area. I'm new to the game. But let's say I ignore it, and I don't go into that cave. I think I'll save that for later. I continue on in the game. I go through Oblivion gates. I'm fighting demons. I'm fighting orcs, very high-end enemies, and I get stronger. I'm level 50. If I now go back to that beginner cave, it's going to have super strong elite orcs in it who are going to kick my ass potentially if I'm not careful. Some people might think that's okay, it keeps the content relevant, but in my book, it lowers the strength of my character and it undermines my achievements in the game. I want to be able to go back to that cave and absolutely tear those goblins to pieces that were level 1, because it was a beginner area. What level scaling does is it makes every area exactly the same in terms of difficulty, in terms of what I can expect. If you scale the levels of mobs, if you scale the loot as well, and it's randomized, which I believe Oblivion does, it's been ages since I've played it, when you do that, nothing can be interesting. It's all a linear curve. I want to have lows where I find a piece of crap that's not useful for me, and I also want to have highs where I find something unbelievably awesome that makes me way stronger. When you level scale it, and you do make that scale linear instead of ups and downs, that's just what happens. Let us have the highs. It's what most really good RPGs do, where I can find an awesome weapon after I clear hard content. No, I've earned it. That to me is really nice. I don't need for everything to be the same. Maybe for casual players at work, because they don't really have to think about these things, they probably just stick around in the game for 20 hours and never touch it again. And maybe that experience works well if it's level scaled, because they never run into anything too frustrating. There's no chance that they're going to run into a mob that's too high level, go to an area they weren't meant to yet. They don't sort of follow the clues to suggest that's going to be too hard. Maybe that was the goal. They carried that into Starfield as well. Procedural generation feels the same, where exploration is pointless because it is that linear curve once again, where I know I won't find anything interesting, because they've developed it in such a way where they don't want me to find anything good, because other players might not get that. Their random generation could lead them to finding a pile of junk. They've got to account for that, so they can't really give me anything good, or the game could be unbalanced. They're pretty much just taking away the fun. They took a lot of the fun out of Oblivion that was there in Morrowind, for instance. So it is a shame. I'm going to put Oblivion as a B, because I like some of the quest lines. It is nostalgic. We did get a lot of memes out of it. And to be honest, the music is awesome. I know the music feels a bit memey these days, because it's in all of those videos where there's real people acting a bit special, but the music actually is really, really cool. I really like the music. That's probably the highlight for me. Fallout 4. I've actually played this a number of times. I see it as a really nice guilty pleasure, in that I can just chuck it on, I can listen to the radio stations in the game, and it's fun for just clearing out dungeons, killing bandits, and doing some fairly mindless quests. If I'm judging it purely as an RPG, it's not a very good game. It shares a lot of the same problems that Fallout 3 had, where the factions don't really make a lot of sense. The voice protagonist, it was super limiting. Even Bethesda know that. They started off with Starfield making it voiced, and they changed their mind and they went back to unvoiced. Whether that was feedback or whether they actually just knew themselves that voice was just a bit dumb. It just limited the options available to the player. I'm not sure. Given they made so many stupid decisions with Starfield, I'm inclined to believe they just did it to use as a marketing tactic, that they could say, this is going to be an RPG like you remember, like our older games. Come back to us. That's the way I felt, but Fallout 4, it is a fun game. That is what Starfield's missing. It is fun to play through, explore, go through the world. I've done it a number of times. I did it on console like 12 years ago, and then when I moved everything to PC, I did play it again, and it was a decent enough time to revisit and go back to, but it certainly doesn't have depth. If you're looking for a high-quality RPG experience, I'd probably be giving it a C or a D, but if you're just looking for a fun game, I don't need to be super elitist and say it's absolute shit, you're not going to have a fun time. I think you can have a fun time with it if you keep expectations in check. And it got some solid DLC like Far Harbor, which probably was better than the base game in some cases when it came to the storyline and the characters. I did read a rumor once that they actually stole the idea of Far Harbor from an existing mod, and it was literally very similar. But if we ignore that, there's maybe not receipts for it, I'm not 100% sure. If we give them the benefit of the doubt, they did a good job on some of the DLC, and it's a reasonably fun game. So I'm going to give it a B, as I am Oblivion. It's okay, not as good as Fallout 3, it's a far cry from Morrowind, and probably again a decline. Their games were getting worse. They have gotten worse for some time. Skyrim, on the other hand, it's an interesting one. I accidentally moved it to the D category when I was moving my mouse, but don't get mad, it's obviously not as bad as Starfield Fallout 76. Even I can see that it is better, so I will give my rating in a second, but what I'll say about Skyrim is I think it nailed the Bethesda formula, which for me, what I see them do well is have some fun enough quests. The Daedric quests in Skyrim were some of the best ones that they've created. Really, really interesting, I think. There was sort of 15, 20 or so of those quests. And they are nice. They're not as boring as some of the generic faction ones, where you become leader of the Mage Guild, leader of the Fighters Guild, you're an expert at everything. Doesn't matter if you've never used a spell in your life, you can still become Mage Leader. Those ones can be a little bit boring and fetch questy at times, but the Daedric quests were really, really cool. The world itself, it nails it. It's fun to explore. If you play it from the perspective of just, I'm in the world, I'm going to go everywhere. That's how I like to play Bethesda games. It's how I see the Bethesda formula, is it's not like a New Vegas or a traditional RPG where you're sort of going to the main settlements, towns, and they're like your hubs that you spend a lot of time in, then you go out in the world to do the quests. I don't really play Bethesda games like that. I pretty much want to go everywhere. I'm gonna probably follow the map in the case of the modern Bethesda games. If it's Morrowind, I'm reading, I'm following signposts, I'm getting out there. But with Skyrim, I'm going to every cave. I'm checking out every possible dungeon. Going through, I know I'll find some, probably not smart puzzles, but at least something to break it up, where I'm not just killing. I solve a simple puzzle, I get some loot, I get out of there, I move on to the next. But I'm really looking at my surroundings. The world is interesting to explore. It's not just an empty area with nothing. That's what Starfield is, where they replace the world essentially with a stupid map that's convoluted, it's unnecessary. Not the case with Skyrim. It's actually a world that I can go in, I can find people, there's random encounters, there's stuff to do. There is a reason 10 plus years on that people are still playing Skyrim. I don't think it's purely nostalgia. I don't even think it's necessarily mods. I think it's just a game that nailed that Bethesda dynamic, the formula. It's the reason people still talk about it. It's the reason people still use it as the standard, at least in the modern era, when it comes to big open world RPGs. Breath of the Wild, for instance, was influenced by it. Nintendo, of all companies, was influenced by this game. That's pretty big. They changed their main franchise, one of their big juggernaut franchises in Zelda, to be more like Skyrim because they saw the potential there, and that's pretty big. Is it my personal favourite game ever? Probably not. I suppose for me, I'm not always someone who plays a game to make my own fun. And Skyrim is that. If you like making your own fun in a game, building a character or setting some rules on yourself, maybe saying, I'm only going to stealth kill enemies, or I'm never going to fast travel, I'm only going to get on my horse, I want this to be immersive, and I'm going to go through. A game where you can make your own rules like that, it's going to appeal to some people, and then you've got all those mods that you can throw in there. And I think Bethesda have to get some credit, not just for making a game where you can make your own fun, but also an engine. I don't know if they really created the creation engine 100% themselves, because wasn't it part of Gamebryo, which was developed by someone else? I don't really know exactly, but let's just say that they did create the engine. The fact that it's so easy to mod, it was a big part of their popularity back then, and it drew people in. It really kept that longevity going, so points to them for that. I'm going to give it an A for that reason. I don't think it's as good as Morrowind. I still think that the whole idea of Bethesda games with the quest compasses, dumbing a lot of the systems down, did hurt their games, and it's come back to bite them in some ways now, because other devs like Larian, for instance, even CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk, I don't think that's an especially hardcore RPG or anything, but it does look at how it can be a better RPG compared to Bethesda games, which started to strip RPG elements out, and Skyrim was definitely guilty of that. It also had a pretty poor interface from memory. It was very console designed. On PC, not so great. You've probably got to use mods for it if you want to have a better experience. I will say lastly that the OST, the soundtrack, it's incredible. Jeremy Soule did amazing work. I still listen to some of those tracks to this day, and it's a real shame that he wasn't there for Starfield. There's some alright music in Starfield, but it's nowhere near as memorable as any of the Elder Scrolls games, in my opinion. So that's the tier list. This went a little bit longer than I thought. I thought, what have we got here? 7 games. This will be 10 minutes, but there was a lot to talk about, a lot to probably break down, and I think it's important, now that Starfield's out, and we're not going to see an Elder Scrolls 6 for something like 6 years. Maybe they'll bring it out earlier because they want to just get away from all the shit talking about Starfield. Maybe they'll try and rush it. Who knows? It could just be a copy of Skyrim. They might just get really worried and just try and let's just copy that formula exactly, and maybe people will like us again. Maybe they go that route, but this is how I'm ranking it. Starfield is a turd. They've been going downhill. Their games have been getting worse and worse. We can see Skyrim, I put it in A, but then Fallout 4's a B. Then you got Fallout 76, Starfield a D, and people might see it differently, but I don't think this is a controversial list by any means. I feel some people at least would feel similar. You change a game here or there, sure, but I don't think it's absolutely out of this world. I'm being hyperbolic. But thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.